This is a brief introduction to my Decrypting the Bible series. What I'd like to point out is my personal philosophy in cracking biblical allegories. This includes my presumptions, my methodology, and why it is I think it's important to crack these allegories. And I'd like to start off with a presumption that I make. The prophetic writings of the biblical authors are highly misunderstood by both Christians and everyone else. The presumption that I make is that the authors were not trying to be diabolical, nor were they trying to be fiction writers. And for example, I'd like to use the book of Daniel. This book was probably written around 150 BCE, but he's talking about events well before 500 BCE, and he's saying they haven't come yet. Unless this guy lived to be 400 years old, we have a problem. And at first glance, it's very easy to dismiss this writer and say he's lying. However, this author believes that time is circular. Essentially, the author is saying the things that have happened before have a bearing on things that are to come. In every single prophetic book of the Bible was written in the manner of prophesying the return of the past. The Daniel author speaks of very real events, encrypts them into allegory, and then offers the allegories as prophecy of the future. If you crack the allegory, you end up getting back to real historical events or characters. And I love real things. The allegorical prophetic part holds nothing for me. However, I have difficulty subjecting writers from around 2,000 years ago to today's standards. These are people that believed in a flat earth, a young earth, geocentrism, and all kinds of wild stories. Obviously, by today's standards, the writers would be considered a bit off. And if someone wrote like this today, they'd be obscure and their writings would see a relatively quick demise. However, 2,000 years ago, these writings would have been typical religious writings. I'd rather leave these authors in their own time rather than drag them out kicking and screaming into my time. Now, the methodology I use is mostly philosophical. Unfortunately, because of the nature of the allegories, I have to make some early presumptions. I try to stick to historical accuracy, and I try to make easy presumptions rather than appeal to obscurity. Any attempt to crack this must fall in line easily. If my understanding of the allegories is too difficult to prove, I must discard my line of thinking. I don't want gray areas or ambiguity at all. I do leave room for allegorical objects like, say, the Whore of Babylon to have more than one meaning. However, when I crack these allegories, I take them in packages. And with the Whore of Babylon story, I'm attempting to crack the beast and leave a trail that shows the viewer how I got there. I haven't really started decrypting the whore yet. And you'll also notice that this series is a work in progress. I don't have a clue as to what I'm getting into around the corner. My first video is an excellent example of this. Though Revelation 17 seemed a mostly complete description of the beast, it ended up ambiguously. In order to solve the ambiguity, I had to address an early allegory that I had skipped. In the next video on the return of Nero, I cracked the beast in chapter 17 using Revelation 13, another description of the same seven-headed beast, this time without the whore, and another beast. Eventually, Revelation 17 became a concrete, history-based understanding of the beast, self-contained, with very little room for error, and consistent with other allegories. And that's exactly what I'm attempting to find. The whole point of cracking these allegories is to discover what historical objects and events the author is talking about. I'm a huge fan of clarity. The authors did not have special insight into the future. They weren't psychic, they didn't have ESP, they claimed to be prophets, but only prophets in regards to the past, returning at a later date. And they obscure the meaning so as to leave the allegories exposed to infinite interpretation. The prophetic writers are highly misunderstood, but if you take into account that they expect the past to repeat itself, their writings begin to make sense historically rather than prophetically. I don't like the idea of the prophets being timeless, ambiguous liars that are just making stuff up. And unfortunately, this seems to be the other possibility. So my hope is to add clarity to the authors and in some ways vindicate them by putting their understanding of things back in their own time where they belong.